Oh, it's reset. It's also reset your name. You're now bearded heretic. To be fair, you're a
Oh,
heretic that's bearded, so you know.
it's,
Yeah, so
yeah.
that works, but I don't want to take the identity away from
No, I will quickly
the original.
change that. But I suppose because it crashed, it didn't take keep the name. So let's change that. There we go. Yo, Phil. You're really right aligned as well. I mean, left aligned. You need to go more to the right. Not talking politically, of course. Right. So, we're back. Just give everyone a couple of minutes to reconnect. I do apologize to everyone who's already tuned back in. Turns out that I ended up with the blue screen of death. It's the first one this computer's had, but I've been saying for a while that this computer is definitely dying. And I think one thing that would probably resolve some of the issues is a total format. But it's one of those things where it's actually hard to do a total format when you're actively using your computer every single day. Yes, Greg. Yeah, nice to have you. We've just streamed for about an hour and a half, and yeah, my computer crashed. Nice to have you here, by the way. Thank you for joining us. So yeah, my computer completely crashed midstream. It definitely shows me that I definitely need a new computer, and as soon as I have signed the contracts for my house, I'm going to put a computer on the credit card because I can't have these crashes constantly happening during the stream. It's odd how inconsistent it is, though, because we had a perfect stream with Bearded Heretic on Tuesday, and today we've just we had a few good stable moments, but then it just started going, and then blue screen. No, Leon, the stream hasn't ended. Let me respond to you, shall I? Right, reply. We back. So, what we discussed so far in part one was the empathetic atheist has now become a Muslim. And we discussed the big ticket arguments that convinced him. And we are obviously aware that conversations happened in between, and we were talking about how like these arguments would have been done sort of through a flow, and they may have gone back over themselves, and he'd have thought on things, and he'd ask questions. And we spoke about how they were generally very respectful, and that is what would have been one of the things that made him listen, not necessarily convinced him, but the good rapport that they built up, and the fact that they were always open to questions being asked, and like you mentioned yourself, Philip, is the fact that they said there are arguments against this. Go and look this up. Look up this guy, so on and so forth. It made him more receptive to the arguments. So, Rusty, just before the stream crashed, you asked what special pleading was, and I gave you a quick overview of what it was. So basically holding people to different standards. So, for example, expecting creationists to look up the academic material on or scientific material on evolution, but then when you talk about something philosophical, whether it's morality or definitions of atheism or anything like that, refusing to do so and just going with the groupthink like the creationists would. So you're telling them they have to go to a standard above the group, but as an atheist you don't think you have to go to a standard above the group. And I was about to give you an example with the special pleading that comes out from a form of atheism. So many internet atheists like to say that atheism is only a lack of belief. And whilst I am fine with people creating their own labels, there's obviously a lot of logical contradictions that can be found, and other issues with that. There's a couple of articles that I've written. Definitional problems with lacking belief is one of them. ontology and the things that we lack, addresses another sort of argument about defining things purely by what they lack. One of the issues the argument has is if you define atheism purely by a lack of belief, then you have to allow theism to be defined by a lack of belief as well. Otherwise, it is special pleading. So, an atheist, in the lack of belief sense, would lack belief in God's existing, but not hold the belief gods do not exist. So, a theist in that regard would lack belief in God not existing, but not hold the belief God exists. The problem there is you actually end up with someone who lacks belief in God existing, and therefore is an atheist, but also lacks belief in God not existing, so is a theist. So you end up with a logical contradiction. A theistic atheist or an atheistic theist. It doesn't make sense, does it? And you'll have some atheists have some sort of excuses like that. No, because that's not how it works. It's on the belief portion. It's not, there's all sorts of arguments they'll have against it, but they're all terrible. The end of the day, if you're not going to allow theists to be defined by what they lack belief in, then but you will allow atheists, you're holding the two groups to different standards, and that again is special pleading. Hopefully that tells you.
It's basically allowing yourself a line of reasoning that you don't allow your interlocutor.
That's said much more simply than what I said, wasn't it? But hopefully you found the example useful. And if you found it confusing, I apologize. Let's have a chat tomorrow on Twitter about it if you like. Send me a DM. I can send you a link to a couple of the articles, and if you prefer to read that way, just let me know, and we'll do that. So
before we move on, I wish atheists would stop calling the Kalam special pleading.
Oh my God, so much.
It's not special pleading.
Yeah.
Please stop.
No.
See, Philip has as much pain as I do from it.
Yes.
Yeah. Or a weak argument, or an argument that you don't agree with, a straw man, because that's not what a straw man is either. Just because you don't agree with the argument, it doesn't make it a straw man, and just because you think it's weak, it doesn't make it a straw man either. I mean, fallacies are something that atheists like to play around with. They go, oh, fallacy bingo. You said that one, you said that one, you said that one. Yeah, I got a row. I've got my dough today. I don't need to be on the internet anymore. And half the time, they're calling out the fallacies wrong. And it's just bloody ridiculous.
That's because they suffer from a fallacy that's not too well known and not too popular, and it's called the G.I. Joe fallacy. And it's that they think that because they know the names of fallacies and some rough idea that they're immune to the fallacies.
Manny, hey, what have you missed? Right, you've missed like the whole conversation around the empathetic atheist and his conversion to Islam, how they did it, and a few things like that. That was in part 1, and then the stream crashed. So we're back, obviously, and this part of the stream we're going to be addressing the fallout that's happened, and by that I mean the comments from atheists online, the things that have been said. There's been a few different things that I've seen pop up on Twitter, but Dave, I think you've got a lot of them listed. I think you've got a few as well, don't you, Philip?
Yeah, I've seen a few. Yes, definitely. I mean, some good takes and some like terrible takes.
Terrible. You only did it for the money.
Yeah, now that one's interesting.
Probably the worst take.
That's the big one.
Yeah.
That's the big one, yes.
Because if he was doing it for the money, being a Westerner, there's another Western religion that would have probably been more popular and earned him more money. In fact, as a Westerner, I can imagine not only would it be unpopular with atheists, but it'd be unpopular with most of the audience that he could potentially have got. And I mean, that's just conjecture as well. But
Yeah.
like, really?
I mean, that's a really popular strategy. Like generally, when you don't like something, you sort of make up something that's completely unsupported by any form of evidence, but it sort of has to be the case because you can't accept anything other than that.
Yeah.
It's really sad and funny as well, I have to admit, to see that happen.
Yeah. Especially from people that claim that they don't believe things without sufficient evidence.
Yeah, I mean, one of those people is someone that believes that they're really kind, but ridiculing theists online is perfectly fine. Yeah. So we already know that particular person contradicts themselves a lot and doesn't accept it when you point out how they're contradicting themselves because it's different. Oh, really? How's it different? It just is because. Okay, then. What would we say that was? So that was obviously the first reaction. Dave, give us another one.
Well, I watched a video this morning from somebody, the Angry Atheist, or not the Angry Atheist, the Arrogant Atheist, something like that. I can't remember his name. He wasn't particularly good. He was arguing why it was a stupid move and how the guy couldn't have been a proper skeptic because he didn't ask for evidence. And he made an argument that the Kalam is the thing that convinced him. And it's stupid to accept the Kalam because there are things on Earth that we don't know that might not have causes. Because we know animals exist and humans had nothing to do with their existence, so therefore they had no cause. It was yeah. Yeah, let me find the guy's name.
I don't.
Yeah, he didn't quite understand what cause meant. I think he thinks cause means something brought about by an agent, which, I mean, even in physics is wrong.
Yeah, definitely. Whilst you look up that name, I'll read out Greg's comment. He says, it still amazes me how many people don't know the difference between valid and sound argument. A valid and sound argument.
Yes.
They struggle to recognize an argument, i.e. the Kalam, can be valid, but it's not necessarily sound. I had that exact conversation today. I've had it a lot. And even though I explained the difference between like valid and sound, someone responded, yeah, but the Kalam's just not even valid. So, well, it does, because the conclusion follows from the premises. You can attack the premises and show that some of them are not sound, or at least as far as we know, are not sound. There isn't enough to conclude that they are sound at the very least, but it's still a logically valid argument. But they conflate the two. They assume if something isn't sound, it therefore isn't valid. Someone then said, well, I don't see the point in logic then, if you can have a valid argument that isn't sound. And I was like, well, okay, think about it this way. You've got a hypothesis in science. What you do is you go, if I do this, this, and this, I expect this. This seems to be what should happen in this controlled environment. And then you do it, and you measure the results. And then you go, okay, yeah, it happened. And you might test again and again and again. Maybe you'll change some of the premises to see what happens if you do that sort of thing. But at that point, you've shown that it's sound. So that's what you'd have with your logically valid argument. You know, if you haven't found any way to actually demonstrate that the premises are sound yet, it means that there's an opportunity. So think of a logically valid argument as a hypothesis. And it's the simplest way to put it. That's the way I'd look at it anyway, at least for someone who doesn't understand why you'd have logic.
Yeah, that's a very good analogy.
Yeah, but then again, like it's not like these are not two separate categories, right? You need still valid arguments in order to have sound arguments.
In order to have sound, yeah.
Sound entails validity, so you still have to understand what that valid is. Like you can say, okay, validity is not enough, but we already know that. That's hardly surprising. Like if you understand logic, you know that that's not enough. It's still not like, oh, that's useless then, that something is valid. It has to be valid in order to make sense. So it's far from useless. You have to still understand that aspect of it. It's not like completely random that you can just put premises together and it's a valid thing.
Yeah.
So that's another thing.
Yeah, I think one of the things is that a lot of atheists think that valid means coming to a conclusion that they agree is rational.
Yes.
Yeah,
but I also think that many atheists, like, if it's a positive sounding word, then it's sort of automatically can't be associated with theism, because it sounds sort of valid. It's almost like, oh no, I'm conceding too much.
Yeah.
But like, if you understand logic, you know that that's not the case. Like, it's fairly uncontroversial. In fact, you're doing the opposite, and I think that this also fits well in the conversation, because if, like, say, the empathetic atheist understands how validity works, and I suppose that he does, because he seems to have an understanding of these concepts, and these people explain to him how it works, and then you see like a swarm of people who didn't even understand that. Who are you going to trust in that scenario? You understand that these people are completely wrong about it. So why should you even trust them if they just can scream that this is like invalid or something, like that it's not even valid when it is? Like that's sort of the problem. Like, you're basically making it harder for atheists to convince people if you don't understand these things. At least that's my take.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I think these sorts of poor arguments, as you say, make us seem more irrational. And because of in-group biases, people will assume that all atheists think that way and all of us are irrational. Sorry, Dave, I cut you off there as well.
That's all right. I was going to say about the trusting. If a plumber came to your house and said that the oil in your sink needs changing, you're going to go to another plumber.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then,
okay. Hang on, sorry, just quickly. That guy was called the Raging Atheist, and funnily enough, he's doing a stream at the moment called Fun with the Kalam. And judging from his argument this morning, it's not going to be particularly informative.
No. Fair. I was just going to say, and in that same conversation I was having about the Kalam, someone else said the Kalam has nothing to do with God.
Yeah, that's another one I wish people would stop saying.
Yeah.
I wish I could go around to everybody's house and slap them for saying things like that.
I can understand that by itself, if that's your entire argument, then perhaps you could say that. But that's not the point. It's not that it's got nothing to do with God. It's arguing for a first cause. It's basically an opening statement to a court case, if you want to think about it that way. So you set these premises up and you conclude that the universe must have a cause. Then you move on to the next bit. Like we were actually discussing in the first part of this stream, they might have started with, say, the Kalam, and then moved on to the contingency argument. And you go through these things. It's not just one argument on its own. There's a lot of arguments that work together. And as we said, it's not just going to be a linear line. There's going to be time to go off and think about it and ask questions, and then finally accepting this one. And when you accept this, you loop back to this one. How does that make you feel about this one now that you've accepted this? Does this change your opinion on that? Oh, well, yeah. So you can't say the Kalam has nothing to do with God. Not at all.
It's part of what's known as a cumulative argument, where you build up your case and build up the strength of the case.
Yeah.
And arguments for God generally tend to be built on like a Lego house. So you can have interchangeable blocks and bring in different things depending on who you're arguing with, what they understand, and things like that. So that's why they usually start with the ex nihilo nihil fit, move on to the Kalam, and then move on to different things. It really depends on the argument they're making, but it's part of a cumulative case for God. So it has everything to do with God.
And also, arguments are not necessarily always like, they don't always have to get you to the conclusion in order to be valuable. Like, it's sometimes still valuable if you reject the conclusion, to understand what premises you would reject, because that gives you information then on how to sort of approach this from a different perspective. Like, because it might be difficult for you to reject some of these premises, and it gives people information. Oh, okay, so he's rejecting one of these premises, but what does that mean for his worldview if he rejects one of these premises. That's also an interesting conversation to be had, I think.
Mm.
And that's what many people also don't understand. It's like sort of useless automatically if it doesn't 100% prove the conclusion, which is also like a completely unrealistic standard, but that's another conversation to be had as well. So, yeah.
That's why I dislike Tom Jump's rabbit in the box argument, because he argues that an argument must come to a particular and singular conclusion, otherwise it's not a good argument, but that's not the case.
Mm.
Yeah, it depends on how it is designed and what it is intended to do, and sort of all these things. It's interesting, I think. And logic in general is sort of like testing for these relationships. It's sort of understanding how these relationships work. It's not really about what the contents of these things like by themselves sometimes, and that's why I think Oppie as well argues that like the theistic worldview is internally coherent. That just means that as far as he can tell, there are no contradictions in the theistic worldview. But that doesn't mean that it is right? It just means that it is internally consistent, which a naturalistic worldview is as well. So I think, all of these things are sort of a level of, I don't even want to say nuance, but it's just like, I don't think people should object to these sorts of observations, because it's really not giving that much away. It's just showing that you understand these things and are able to argue on this level. And I think that's a good thing. And as much as possible, especially if you want to talk about these things online with other theists, you should know these things as much as you can, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because like you said, when you come across an atheist who does have some understanding and they go to other atheists and they're like, oh, evidence, blah, blah, blah. That's not sound. That's not valid. You're going to go, well, this group knows what they're talking about. I'm going with this group. They might be theists.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And sadly, a lot of these people who actually do understand what they talk about, especially in circles where they sort of debate these things, are theists. Like, I have no issues in saying that. In fact, I said that the precise thing a couple of months, I guess, now back. Like, theists usually do understand, and I think, like, not all of them, of course, because you always have, like, I think on average, if you just look at people who are religious, I think tons of them have no idea what this is all about. And I think you can, like, I just want to really emphasize this, that it's not like all theists are logical or something like that. I don't think that is the case. But there are still, like, many who like to debate these things that actually do understand these things. And I think there's the sort of difference. Within the confines of those people who like to debate these things, you see sort of a discrepancy sometimes, unfortunately.
I mean, if you think about apologists as the equivalent of an atheist activist, there's a distinct quality difference between the atheist activist and the apologist.
Yeah. I mean, some apologists are like really terrible.
Oh, they're terrible. Like Turek.
They're really, really bad. Yeah, Turek is amazingly bad in my opinion, but like, still, he sort of understands a bit of this stuff, and I mean, many atheist activists do it just flies over their head without them realizing even what they're giving away. So that's problematic.
Yeah. No, I think you're right there. I think the thing is, a lot of the online atheists just assume that every theist is like that fundy theist, because they might have been in a debate group or online, and they've had a few interactions with the fundy style theists who are pretty clueless and are all fire and brimstone. And they are, much of a muchness between the two, because the atheist is quite that way as well. But when you get a theist that does know their stuff, they do really easily put us atheists to shame. Like, really, really easily. But the atheist will not accept it, and they will essentially be the proverbial pigeon playing chess. And it's amazing to see. And when you do take that a sort of look away from it, I mean, I did try a lot to have conversations, and I still do sometimes with atheists online, to try and make them realize these gross errors that they're making, because I'm an atheist too, and I'm associated with this group, and I don't want to be associated with these behaviors. You know, I've done plenty of shit things. I've demonstrated a number of bad behaviors myself. I sometimes do lose it with people sometimes, and I'm still a complete cock, right? It happens. We're human. But in general, I think we should try our best to behave well. We shouldn't go in with a default attack position. And I think too many of us atheists do that. I mean, Greg even says, I have fun arguing with atheists in other groups. I'm called a Poe on a regular basis by atheists. Do you know, I get called a theist troll myself, because I suppose I wouldn't go in and say I'm trying to argue with them, but they do turn into arguments. I'm trying to have a conversation with them and make them realize that particular behaviors aren't the most positive, or there's an error in their logic, or they don't really understand rationality or the burden of proof or morality, or something like that. But yeah, as Leon says, arguing with internet atheists is a headache. Yet I can't seem to resist every opportunity I get. Yeah, I've been getting better and better at resisting. I can understand it, but I'm getting better at resisting. I think the fact that we've got more and more people on our Discord server, even though they might operate different positions, we're all having a decent conversation, and it's enabling me to take my social media addiction away a little bit and just not get involved with that one. I'll leave that one. And then all of a sudden someone will say something and I'm wrapped in a conversation for 3 days again.
Well, you see, that's one thing I'll say for T-Jump. I don't think his arguments are particularly good. I don't particularly like him. But he is trying to be more than just the "you're thick, you're an idiot." He is at least trying to be slightly better in his discourse, even though it's not particularly good discourse. I will give him credit for that.
Yeah, I think that's kind of I think it's also interesting to consider. I probably actually am not the right person to talk about these things, but I think Bearded Heretic might be the appropriate one. But I think there's sort of a psychological aspect to why this is happening in general, because like atheism usually, like we are usually brought up in a religious framework, and so atheists then lose this religion, and so they automatically, like, presumably when they lose their faith, it is because they see sort of some sort of a fallacy, or not even fallacy. Like let's mention fallacy. That's not a good, but some sort of flaw in their reasoning, and so they lose then their religion, and so they automatically assume, they sort of project that, oh, I lost my religion, right? I was once religious. I understand how it felt to be religious, so it must be that all these other peoples are in this frame of mind. And I can see how that I changed my mind on this issue because I can compare myself to my past. And so like I sort of assume that automatically all these other people are in the same frame of mind as well. And so I can go ahead and just say, oh, but what have you considered this? That convinced me, or like that's why you're wrong. And that's also why I feel like atheists do not feel really this necessity to justify their belief, because it's just like, oh yeah, I thought this thing was true, and then I figured out that I had bad reasons for it, and so now I'm here. I landed in this, and I sort of get sort of antagonistic towards that position. And so I don't feel like I have to justify where I landed, because it's just like sort of I rejected another thing and I landed here. And so that's how it leads to it. While Christians usually, if they want to sort of be considered like seriously, they have to sort of defend what they believe in. That's sort of the natural progression. And so they sort of have to get into philosophy at some point. And that's why I think, like, if you start to get really engaged in these topics, that a theist will have this basis because he feels the need to find tools to defend the position, while an atheist is just, okay, I believe this thing, I don't believe it anymore. So it's just sort of like a lack in a way. Yeah. And that's why I think we get into this sort of scenario. And yeah, that's
yeah, I agree. And you often hear a lot of atheists who will argue something like, well, I don't have to justify not believing something. My position doesn't need justification. I just don't believe you. And if they had those justifications, then maybe their arguments might be stronger. And, maybe somebody like the empathetic atheist might have had stronger arguments and better tools to present his case.
Yeah, But even if you just say, I don't believe you, you have to give reasons why, right? Like, presumably, if you want that to be a reasonable rejection, you have to give reasons why in a way.
I mean,
Because it's
technically,
just,
you don't
like,
have
otherwise
to.
you can say,
You technically
you
don't have to.
No,
but I get what you're saying. To demonstrate that you are holding a rational position, you should at least be able to justify it to yourself. And if you can justify it to yourself, then what's the issue with sharing it with the other person you're having the conversation with?
That's what I meant.
Why are you having a conversation? So, no, I knew you meant that, but I just wanted to clear it up because there might be some people out there who jump over that statement. And language is a complex thing, and I find that you have to be incredibly clear with what you're saying, otherwise people can misinterpret you. I mean, we even saw that earlier on today with that guy who just had no clue what was going on. It transpired by the end of it, but he'd make statements like, you should replace philosophy, you should replace a proposition with physics or maths. I was like, why would you replace a proposition with a subject? That doesn't make sense. Oh yeah, you're intellectually dishonest. And like, what? And then I tried to find out, and I was like, well, do you mean, talking about a mathematical problem? For example, I mean, we could just say a simple one like 1 + 1 = 2, which is a true statement, but, you could have dispositions towards the answer. Is this the sort of thing you're talking about? Because just talking about saying mathematics, it's not the same. If you're trying to make a proposition out of mathematics, that's fine. I understand that. But what you're actually saying just doesn't actually make sense. You're being very unclear with your language. But yeah, and then I was accused of moving the goalposts and all sorts. I was like, right, okay.
Yeah. I mean, going back to the I don't believe you thing, atheists should consider this. Imagine if you told a Christian about evolution and they just said, I don't believe you. And you said, well, why not? And they said, well, I don't have to justify it. I just don't believe you.
Yeah.
You would think them irrational.
Yeah.
You would think, well, you don't have good reason to not believe me. You're an idiot. Christians and Muslims kind of think the same thing, going the opposite way.
Yeah. Yeah, And do you want to be thought of as an idiot? Of course, they're probably in their mind, they've got the in-group bias going on. Doesn't matter what they think. I don't care what they think. They're the irrational ones, not me. Not really understanding that without the justification, you are irrational.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that it comes down to. Like, the burden of proof, as we said a number of times, isn't necessarily to prove the position true. It's to justify it as a rational position. It doesn't necessarily have to be verified or highly evidenced. You've just got to have a decent argument, a well thought out argument, logical reasoning, coherent and consistent beliefs, and no strong conflicting evidence. And that's the same for any belief position, even a lack of belief position. Now, I just want to say hello to Three Vikings. Nice to have you here. Always good to have you here. We are having an enjoyable evening, even with the fact that the stream died and we had to do a two-parter.
It would be one of our streams if we didn't.
And also, in Rusty, you asked a question about what is pigeon chess. So the official quote is, never play chess with a pigeon. The pigeon just knocks all the pieces over, then shits all over the board, then struts around like it won. So the common one, the very first time I saw this meme, it was applied to a creationist, and it was along the lines of arguing with a creationist is like playing chess with a pigeon, and then the rest of the quote. But my point there was, I find a lot of our community, our fellow atheists, are the proverbial pigeon playing chess too. And the more I engage with a lot of the online atheist community, the more I'm disinclined to engage with anyone online at all. And it's terrible. I don't like feeling like that way, because I do enjoy the conversations I have when I get into Right. So I definitely need to find a way to upgrade my computer, eh? Are you back? Oh, you guys, sounds aren't coming through. I don't know what's going on. We've lost your sound, guys. Can you hear me still? Let me go back to Discord and see if the settings have reset themselves. This is typical. So yeah, as I was talking about earlier, that we've been having issues with my computer recently doing these streams, and it's decided to kill the sound of the other guys. So let me change it to something else and switch it back.
I agree.
Yes, you're there. You're back.
It's been a great conversation.
I mean, we haven't gone into a lot of detail, but
yeah, sure.
you know,
but I think that's not really the place to do that. I think, or at least not for this stream. I think it's actually more useful to talk about. Oh,
can you guys hear me now?
Back.
Oh, he's back.
Yeah,
So.
Yeah. You can hear me though.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I was just saying. Discord, even though it still had the correct input and output devices, it still wasn't picking them up. So I had to essentially turn them off and on again. But yeah, so we are having issues with something in my computer dying. With the fact that I got a blue screen earlier, it sort of makes me hopeful that it isn't the sound card, but also unhopeful because it probably means that it is the computer. So
hardware.
Something is dying in my computer. And for some reason, it really just doesn't like streaming. So we should probably move on to the next point anyway. We'd addressed the guy making a comment about the Kalam. Yes, Greg, I do have a standalone sound card. It's a external USB one. I do have an internal one lying around somewhere, but it's older. Hopefully, it still works. Because when I upgrade, I plan to use my old sound card in this because it's going to become my audio production machine if it lasts. Because I really want to get back into making beats, and I never find the time or energy to do so. But I'm gonna try get back into it one last time. But I use a Focusrite external sound card, and it's bloody brilliant. I really, really, really like the audio quality off of it when I've done direct recordings as well. So when it's not necessarily going through streaming software and having frequencies cut out of it, it's so clear and really, really good. I've always been a little bit paranoid about your external sound cards. I've always wanted something on board, but this one's been great. I just hope it's not that dying and causing the problems, and it's the internals. But yeah. So we covered off the money comment, and we covered off the guy not really understanding the Kalam, and a bit of conversation around that. What was the next one that you saw?
There was people saying he was never truly a skeptic or never truly an atheist.
So engaging in a no true Scotsman fallacy. Well done, atheists.
Yeah.
Why does it mean? Why would that mean that you are not a true atheist? Surely, if you were a true skeptic and an argument convinced you that a different way, then you are a true skeptic by changing your position. A true skeptic doesn't just doubt; they actually constantly look inwardly and outwardly at the arguments, and eventually go, "Do you know what? This works. This has convinced me."
Yeah. I think one of the problems is a lot of people think being a skeptic means just saying, where's the physical evidence? Where's the scientific evidence?
Yeah.
And it's just not that.
Yeah. And what scientific evidence do you want for a metaphysical being? What does science actually deal with? The physical, right? Is God physical? No. So how are you going to get scientific evidence for one? Well, you just will. So what do you want? What actual verifiable evidence? Okay, so what does this evidence look like? Well, scientific. And they go round and round in these circles, and they don't actually know what they're even looking for. It's so vague and watery. I can at least make a few statements about things that I might find convincing. Hell, it might even be an argument one day that convinces me to change my position. There have been plenty of arguments that have changed my mind on a lot of things. So who knows? One day maybe I'll be a theist. I doubt it very strongly, but I wouldn't be a good skeptic if a convincing argument was presented and I just rejected it. Just because, well, no.
If you're saying that nothing will ever convince you, you just doubt everything, then all you're saying is you're closed-minded, not a skeptic.
Yeah.
At least that's the way I see it.
Yeah, I agree.
There
I think
you
a
go.
good way to put it is sometimes to compare it. Like, many people believe that it is possible or even likely that there is sort of life somewhere else in the universe, and but you can sort of make the same sort of where's the proof? Where's the empirical proof that that is the case, or something like that? And then they will sort of blank out and be like, oh, okay. I mean, there's something wrong. At least I hope that they see that, because you sort of can make a compelling case, I think, for the idea that there might be life in the universe, or that even that it is rational to believe that there is life in the universe.
Yeah.
And that is even sort of, that is still within the physical, as we said, like God wouldn't be in the physical even, so it's even further removed. But you can sort of justify the belief, I think, that there might be life in the universe. And yeah, that's sort of a conflict that I see usually, because you don't have proof, yet you have sort of justifiable belief for that. And in the same way, I think you can justify God, or at least that's sort of what theists would like to do, I think. They wouldn't like to sort of prove 100%, but at least provide good reasons.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, even I'll admit, I think there are persuasive arguments, or not persuasive, but arguments for classical theism that have persuasive power. They just don't persuade me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would agree. I respect the sort of intellectual work. There's a lot of intellectual work in theism. Like you then go and see people that are like what is the very common one? They're sort of like logical theist is an oxymoron or something like that. That is just so hilarious to me. But like there is like serious philosophical work done on the theistic side. That doesn't mean that like I don't find it persuasive personally, and I don't think any of us do. But it doesn't mean that these people are not thinking very hard about it, and they're not stupid because of it. And I hope people realize that.
Go look at like Alexander Proust and say his arguments are poorly constructed.
Exactly. But there are many other theists that I could name that sort of have the same.
Oh yeah.
But you also
go look at Elephant Philosophy. Go look at his YouTube channel and come back and say that he has no logic or no rationality. He outshines most atheist activists that are on YouTube.
Which reminds me, I still need to do that list from all the recommendations that I said I was going to do, which I've forgotten to do. But I will get onto that one. You also hear the inverse from atheists. What do you mean academic atheism or philosophical atheism? And you're like, well, there's a lot of work gone into it. No, atheism is just a position on a topic. You're like, right. But there's a little bit more to it. Theism, right? Okay. There's someone that believes in God, but actually there are people who have loads of arguments for the existence of God. And equally, there's plenty of arguments for the non-existence of God and various gods, but generally they focus on the classical theistic God. So there is a lot of work done on atheism, and I would recommend you look into it, because going back to our original point that we had about atheists' tool belt, it's pretty empty. The average atheist is not prepared for a lot of the good philosophical arguments theists have. And that seems to be what happened with the empathetic atheist. He didn't have anything in his tool belt that could help him do it. And even though they told him, go look for the the rebuttals to these arguments, he probably did have a look, but if he didn't know where to look in the first place, and his best guess was maybe going to YouTube as a YouTuber himself, he'll probably have found a lot of the atheists on YouTube that don't have much in their tool belt either. So, loading your empty tool belt with empty tools, invisible tools, should I say, really going to do much, is it?
Yeah, that's what happens when your community venerates Aaron Raw instead of Graham Oppie.
Yeah, definitely. So catching up on the chat just before we move on to the next one. Leon says, a true skeptic is skeptical of their skepticism. Yeah.
It is kind of right.
Yeah. but not so skeptical of their skepticism that they don't apply it anymore. There's balance to be held.
Skepticism should be used in a kind of virtuous way rather than just a I doubt everything way.
Yeah, no, that's good because then it becomes a vice essentially.
Yeah.
I'm sure skepticism wasn't one of the virtues in classic Greece, but it should be.
Well, skepticism back then was a very different thing to how skepticism is used now.
That was
by
Pyrrhonian
most atheists.
skepticism, wasn't it?
And academic skepticism.
Yeah.
More about whether we can come to know something rather than just saying, oh, well, I doubt that.
Yeah. I remember our stream on that one.
Yeah.
One of the
It's
few I
whether
did
knowledge could be acquired.
Yeah.
That's what skepticism used to be.
Yeah. So it makes sense that in the modern world, the way skepticism, not the doubt version of skepticism, the way skepticism ought to be applied, the process of it, etc., as you say, should be done in a virtuous way, a balanced way, not in a way that it becomes a vice. Carrying on, Three Vikings says, do we always argue the existence of the metaphysical God, or do we deal with the personal God? It depends what you mean by the personal God, because the personal God is a metaphysical being if you're talking about Christianity or something like that. If you're talking about an actual physical God, like the Norse gods were supposed to be, for example, they were physical beings that could come down from Valhalla and interact with the world. That's a bit different. I
know that there's people following those gods these days, but I don't think any of them actually believe they exist in the same way that one might believe that the God of Christian theism exists.
Yeah, I think with a lot of religions, they sort of get relegated to mythology, don't they? And they're even if you might have a few stragglers believing in one way, shape, or form, or living their life in accordance as if they believed, it's, as you say, it's not the same sort of fire that the newer religions might have.
Yeah.
Greg, this must be a joke. I'm sorry, but Ra's work in philosophy is brilliant. I still love the guy. Oh, phylogeny. I misread it. See, last week I got confused with phenomenology and thought he was talking about phylogeny, and now I see phylogeny and I think he's talking about philosophy. Yes, brilliant. His work is done with creationism is brilliant. His work in philosophy, though, is well,
non-existent.
Yeah. His
understanding, you might almost say.
Yeah. I lack a belief in Aaron Brow's philosophy abilities.
Oh, do you know what? I've just noticed the comments are actually coming in from Periscope today. They never usually do, but they've actually come through. How cool!
Nice one.
Yeah. Sorry. So, Three Vikings says, most arguments are trying to disprove God. A lot of people believe and have a neurological evidence. Not sure I can explain myself over chat. Can't find you on Discord. We are on Discord, but I tell you what, if you want to have that conversation at some point, whether you want to have it off air or if you want to do it on a stream in the future, it sounds like a conversation that would be quite enjoyable. I think we're coming to the end of our two-part stream, and before everything crashes,
go another half hour if we need to.
Yeah, but I mean, should we address the last few points that we've got for tonight, and then Three Vikings, I'd love to come back to your point and have a chat about it in the future. Maybe we can have a chat on Twitter and come back that way. But yeah, so
I think there are genuinely great arguments for atheism as well. Just wanted to put that out there. So there are really, really good arguments for atheism as well. So you can argue for atheism. It's not like it's something that you cannot do.
Yeah,
and that's what I wish a lot of atheists would stop saying, that there are no arguments for atheism. You don't argue for atheism, because there are, and they're strong, and that's what we need in the atheist community: arguments for not just not believing in God, but the idea that God doesn't exist. Because you're never going to convince a theist to drop their belief if all you have is an argument. Well, this is why you shouldn't believe it. You shouldn't believe anything
Yeah, I
you're
mean,
not
you
convinced
get
by.
to agnosticism at that point, right? Like you just get to, okay, I have no good reason. That's the best scenario. You have no good reason to believe that God exists, but also no good reason to believe that he doesn't exist. And so you get to agnosticism at best if you just criticize theistic arguments.
And just try arguing that there are no good reasons to believe with a fideist. Because they believe that there are no good reasons to believe, but they believe that you should just have faith.
Manny asks, on the first part, did you guys talk about problems with empathetic atheists' rebuttals?
I didn't hear any rebuttals, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, he sort of attempted to argue a bit, but I didn't see
Yeah, so that's what we were referencing.
More sort of,
sorry, Dave, go ahead.
His arguments were more sort of, well, I just believe the foundation is natural. And then that was basically the whole of the argument and the strength of his argument.
Which was the point we were making about atheists not having anything in their tool belt. Because, well, they only lack belief. Well, I don't need to justify. I don't need to, know anything about it. There are no arguments for atheism, so on and so forth. All the things that you might hear online from other atheists. And that's the problem. And I think because he met some people who are clearly respectful, built a good rapport, had a good conversation, and actually had a fully loaded tool belt plus a full backpack.
And good rhetorical skills.
Yeah, as well.
He was just wowed. So
I mean, some of his rebuttals are showing as well, because he was at some point, I don't know if it was in the clip, but in some other stream, he was sort of like, okay, but I would need sort of empirical evidence to accept, say, the first premise of the Kalam or something like that. And the other ones sort of argued, well, that this is sort of empirical because we can observe, that everything that begins to exist sort of has a cause. It's a very strong empirical inference that we are making. And sort of then he went, oh, yeah, that's right, or something like that. Because it is true, right? It is true. But I think it shows that he's like in this frame of mind where, okay, yeah, this usually works with, sort of empirical evidence, but they show him that there is empirical evidence in a way for this premise at least. And so then he sort of has to concede that. And that's sort of what I've seen as well with some of his attempts at conversation in this sense.
I didn't actually see that one, but yeah, it is. They raise a very good point. And I mean, if one way to put it is, if you came across a glowing orb in the middle of a forest somewhere, chances are you would think it came from somewhere. You wouldn't automatically just think it came from nowhere. So the idea that all things have a cause has a kind of strong inference to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then also sort of like when they talk about, say, the contingency, right? And they say that everything that is contingent is in this sort of set. So whatever caused this set has to be outside of this set and therefore not contingent. That is a purely logical thing. And so he was like, I think sometimes attempting at, but I would need empirical evidence for that. And then they asked him, well, why would you need that? It seems completely coherent and logical to say that if everything that's contingent is in this set, that something outside of this set would need to be not contingent. And of course that is the case, right? But the problem is that if you expect everything, it has to be scientific or else it doesn't make sense. If you're in this sort of frame of mind, then you'll see, okay, this actually makes sense, right? If everything is contingent in one set, then of course it has to be outside. And then you're sort of surprised by this revelation, if you will, inside of your mind. And so you start to be like, oh, actually this starts to make sense now, because this is logical in a way. And I see why you're saying these things. And then you go along with that. And that's sort of, I think, what happened.
So was there another one you wanted to address?
Yeah. Another common criticism I saw, and this is one I kind of agree with, but probably for different reasons than they were making it, is that they said being a skeptic doesn't protect you from being irrational with regards to his conversion.
Right. Yeah.
And I sort of agree because I've met plenty of irrational skeptics.
Yeah. It depends on
accidentally a good point.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, because they're more badge wearing skeptics. It's an identity thing for them rather than a method, I guess.
Yeah. And, the whole empirical evidence is what changes the mind, blah, 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 blah. But as Philip just pointed out, when that's all you think, when you come across actual decent logical inferences, you're kind of going, oh, okay, I never thought of that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a fair point. Yeah. And I suppose they obviously don't think about applying that rule to themselves as well, because they're obviously the rational skeptic and this guy's an irrational skeptic. Yeah. But I mean, it's that whole thing.
That would be actually... Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's fine. I wasn't going to say anything interesting
That would be actually a good conversation, I think. If you think that the skeptic can be irrational, then what makes someone rational if it's not the skepticism? Right? Then you sort of get into this territory that is unexplored and that is unfamiliar, because it's usually, it's rational if it's skeptical or something like that. So that would be an interesting follow-up, I think.
Yeah.
Next one.
That's about all I can really remember. There was a lot of why would he choose Islam as well, because Islam is one of the most misogynistic and most violent. And I can sort of get behind that one. I would consider Islam not a particularly good religion to choose if you're going to choose one. Go with Buddhism or Jainism or something, because they're at least kind of peaceful, but that's a different kind of criticism.
Yeah, and obviously you can't actually choose what you believe. You get convinced by it. So, I mean...
Well, that's the other thing, is a lot of skeptics and atheists will argue that you don't get to choose your beliefs, but then complaining that he's been convinced by something and now believes something else. Well, if he can't choose those beliefs, then how can you criticize that he chose that belief?
Yeah, exactly. And to be honest, they were probably the first theists that took the time to do everything that we've discussed in the stream, the way they've done it, and all of a sudden, whoa. And it could have been any theist who happened to have a well-filled tool belt. For any religion. It would have been any religion that had these strong sort of arguments. But it just so happened to be this one.
Darth Dawkins could learn a lot from them.
Yeah?
Yeah, he definitely needs some help in this.
Yeah, he hasn't been around for a while.
Thankfully, yeah.
Yeah, probably not around here, but he's still very active.
Yeah,
I'm sure. I think we just didn't give him the time of day. Or it just comes in with all of his arguments. You go, that's not what this stream's about. You're in the wrong place. Sorry.
Bye.
Maybe more people could try and do that. I mean, that's the thing. Like, our stream isn't about religion bashing and things like that, is it? No. We might address we might address problems in religion, but we also address problems in atheism. We address world problems and whatever. Generally, we take a philosophical and somewhat scientific edge to things. There's far more things to talk about than just bashing God and theists. Yeah. Did you have any more that you saw on the ones that you watched, Philip?
No, I don't think so. But I've seen a good one, and so maybe that's for a change a good idea. There was Atheist Pastor, which sort of said someone in the atheist community converted to Islam. I disagree with his reasons, but what I really disagree with is the abuse some people are sending his way. Atheists complain about how they are treated leaving religion. So how about not being hypocrites? He's still our friend, something like that. I thought that was a really good take, and so I wanted to take the time to actually at least address some of this good stuff as well, to not always completely bash the community.
Yeah, no, it's good to see. I think I might have seen that one on Facebook, actually. It might have even been Steve who copied that. I think because it was a Twitter message, wasn't it, originally from Atheist Pastor?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's a tweet. Yes.
Yeah. So I didn't see that on Twitter. I saw it on Facebook, and I think it was Steve who posted it in a couple of groups. So yeah. I think it is good to actually see that there are some other atheists out there that can address these things in a more logical and rational way and point out the negative behaviors. But the problem that we're going to have there as well is I bet Atheist Pastor then got othered by a lot of the atheists who disagreed with it. I mean, I haven't seen the responses to the tweet, but there were a couple in the Facebook group, although it had only just gone up, and I was quite encouraged by there were only 4 comments on there, and 3 of them were good, and one of them was a little bit sardonic, but it wasn't overly offensive. But I think because there was an original positive message being presented, they didn't want someone to suddenly see them being this way. Whereas I think on somewhere like Twitter, it's far more public and way more open to dogpiling. And the second you get a couple of your big atheists making these nasty comments, you'll get more and more people chiming in and going, yeah, right on, and all patting each other on the back and making almost progressively worse comments. But I mean, this is just my assumption, so I don't know if that has actually how it went. Have you seen any particularly bad responses to that one?
I've just read one that is like attack the ideas, not the people, which is one of your favorites. So I had to sort
of. Yeah, it's definitely. I mean, that's going back to everything being tied into ego, which we addressed in quite a long fashion in Tuesday's stream with Bearded Heretic. So I will leave that one there for now, unless anyone wants me to clarify again. Yeah, well, I think then if there isn't anything else, do you have anything you want to summarize for the end of the stream?
I think it's going to be an interesting thing to watch play out, like how atheists start treating him, whether the people that considered him friends suddenly drop him. I think he'll start getting more and more Muslim support. Not necessarily Patreon money in that sense, but he'll find a community coming to him as one community leaves. I'm wondering about how he'll be talked about, whether he'll be piled on and mocked, even by people he considered friends previous. I think it's going to be an interesting thing to watch.
I wonder if it lasts as well. I wonder if he'll meet, now that he's been convinced by these sorts of argument, maybe there will be some of the atheists out there that know a bit more than the average and will actually talk to him about, so what arguments did you find convincing? And maybe go, so how did you justify like this problem with this premise? And he might suddenly go, oh my God, it's happening again. I don't know. Again, as you guys say, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
I think for a while, any discussions that go on about his reasons for believing and the arguments, I think it'll be the people from the Thought Adventure podcast that'll kind of get in between him and the arguments first, at least until he becomes more proficient in the arguments. So they'll be arguing with those people rather than the empathetic atheist, because that's generally the way a lot of it works. But it'll be interesting to see if any do come forward to argue against the Thought Adventure people, because that would make it a very different dynamic.
Right. Well, I have to say it's been different, change of pace for a Thursday. We've been our routine of like reviewing particular articles, generally reading out our own articles, occasionally doing someone else's. But today we addressed the Empathetic Atheist's conversion to Islam, the way it was done, and the reactions from fellow atheists. It's very, very, very interesting to see how this is going to play out. And hopefully all the atheists out there will calm down a little bit, give the guy a bit of breathing room, maybe show a little respect, maybe stop it with the no true Scotsman fallacies, etc. Maybe realize that actually their tool belt is just as empty. They're just far more denialist than him. And actually it's a good thing to show that someone can actually change their mind, be convinced of different things, even if you don't agree with their end result.
Yeah, I mean, I don't agree with the end result. I think he's wrong in what he's chosen, but I kind of wish him well, and I hope he gets what he needs from his journey.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I second this completely.
Yeah. So, I mean, there you go. We might not agree with you, but we wish you all the best. And I hope the atheist community stop being dicks to you.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for joining us tonight, Philip.
Yeah, it's been a blast.
Oh, it was great. Thank you for having me. It was really fun.
Yeah, and I am sorry again for the computer problems.
No, you're not. You did it on purpose.
Right, so you've been listening and watching to the Fresh Air Sci-Fi stream. I'm Joe.
I'm Dave. And he's Philip.
Okay.
And I didn't say anything.
Okay, that's how it's supposed to work. I know it now. Okay.
Have yourselves a good night, everyone.
Good night, all.
Good night.